Oh, hey everyone, thanks for joining us again on our Aim for Excellence webinar series, where we are breaking down strategic, operational, and career-related best practices and RevOps with leaders in the space that we admire. Again, I'm James, co-founder of AccountAim. We're a go-to-market data and automation platform that streamlines account-based sales, territory management for B2B sales teams. I'm very excited to be joined by Linda Fitzek today. Thanks for taking the time out, Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Great to meet you. Where should we get started?
Maybe just background. So Linda, we brought Linda on because she's had a variety of RevOps leadership roles, is now a fractional RevOps consultant. And maybe Linda, you can start by just kind of giving a quick 1-2 minute background of yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm originally from Ireland. If you don't pick up on it right away, you may at some point throughout the conversation. I moved to the US in 2009 to build out marketing ops for Google Cloud. It was a startup in Google at the time. After about a decade, I kind of wanted to get closer to the software that was being developed for people in roles like mine. And Everstring was doing some really great AI work with account and data intelligence. So I joined them to run marketing ops and later became the VP of RevOps. And since then, I've kind of just been building out my understanding of the tech stack and how to optimize for various business capabilities. And that's what I bring to my consulting practice.
That's great. Really excited to kind of hear those perspectives from being in a huge company like Google to some of the more upstarts. I'm sure we'll dive into that.
Yeah.
But before we do, I love to just ask a couple basic questions of all our guests. And the first one just being, how do you define RevOps?
To me, RevOps is a little bit like an ER or a doctor's office. And you're kind of like there to monitor the vital stats of all the touch points of customer engagement. You're being asked to kind of see around corners, which can be difficult, but I like to think that RevOps is monitoring the data so closely that it becomes kind of easier to diagnose where a problem might be or might occur in the future, and then prescribe a recommended course of action to treat. So it's kind of how I like to think about it.
I think that's such a good description because we often talk about with guests, how do you turn RevOps from just being kind of a tactical order taker to being a strategic partner? I
Yes.
think what you just mentioned is a perfect encapsulation of, identifying issues proactively and recommending solutions.
Yeah. Here's your prescription. Now, don't come back and tell me you didn't get it.
You mentioned the vital signs
Yeah.
for RevOps. Are there any that come to mind? Is it kind of the typical SaaS KPIs, or is there more to it?
They're typical SaaS KPIs, but there are a couple that to me are kind of like critical. LTV to CAC would be kind of one of the main ones, just kind of net revenue retention is another key one. But underneath that, the kind of the connective tissue, so to speak, would be lead to op, op creation, productivity per head, per month, per week, activity rates, caseload. There are so many. But I like to build over the course of an engagement with a client, I like to build out their reporting and dashboards. And then that really helps them to be more self-sufficient. So then I can be even more strategic when I'm recommending, whatever course of action might be next. So over the course of a year, let's say if I'm working with a client for that long, we'll start with some of the basics and then we'll iterate and get deeper. And then as I bring along the managers and the experts in the team, they then feel more confident to ask the deeper questions. So it all kind of interconnects eventually.
What are the common roadblocks in, putting together what you just described in terms of, all of the key metrics and actually getting them to be used and to ask the right questions? Like what stops companies today?
I think the main one is when there isn't kind of a clear vision from leadership or clear top line business goals. Every department is then expected to come up with their own OKRs, and oftentimes those OKRs aren't aligned. So you have your sales managers, your marketing managers, and your customer success team, and there may be leaders within those teams, but they're developing their strategy based on what they need for their team to fuel their own growth and their own success. It's not necessarily totally coordinated. So then you start to see friction coming. And RevOps is one of the teams that really is there to kind of help mitigate some of that friction and risk by trying to realign goals, business objectives to a top set of initiatives. Like if net revenue retention is the most important thing that we focus on this year as a business, that has to trickle down to all of the teams. It can't be bottoms up for every single objective and driver. And I think that is why oftentimes you see some friction between departments is just because there is that kind of misalignment top down. So
Hmm.
planning takes a long time, especially in large organizations. It can take up to 2 months.
Hmm.
And it's a very big investment, but oftentimes some of the field managers, like the frontline managers, feel like it's just taking away from their core roles. Like it's a huge investment of time and effort for them to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully RevOps takes away some of the pain of that by laying out frameworks and structure and giving them access to the information that they need in order to make more effective decisions in the future.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think all the more reason to have a kind of consolidated RevOps team across all go-to-market functions, right? Versus
Yes,
siloed
yes.
in sales, CX, and marketing, where you might have that same conflict.
Yeah, and I do believe that's kind of how it originated initially, was just every individual department was being given more and more responsibility and being asked to do more with, technical data or any sort of data and metrics.
Hmm.
And, the head of marketing is coming in to manage a programs budget and now all of a sudden is being asked to do kind of campaign performance evaluation and dollar in, dollar out analyses and just kind of struggling with that. So RevOps then became a logical place to put in analytical people that could really help to drive business growth and decision making.
Hmm. Switching gears
Yeah.
slightly. So you mentioned earlier, you've worked at a couple huge public companies and maybe a little bit smaller then, but
Yep.
still huge, Google, Uber, as well as some growth stage companies, Sendoso, Everstring. Um, how do the most important jobs to be done differ, if at all, between companies of kind of those different scales?
So I guess at large companies, it's small problems with huge scale, like having 20 million contact records in Marketo when you're only contracted for 8 million. That's a true story, by the way. And you're always fighting for access to leadership in an effort to kind of secure resources to address problems that you have. You're building business cases that it may never see the light of day or take more than a year or two to gain enough traction to even be discussed properly. So when you're in the role where you are seeing around corners and you are able to predict something, being able to build enough of a compelling business case to get attention from the
Hmm.
powers that be can be very difficult. And then on the flip side, at smaller companies, it's making big decisions without a lot of reliable data, especially in the early days. So, as an example, like in the SaaS world, as you know, startups thrive on deal swaps. So, from a business perspective, it makes a massive amount of sense to get feedback, to get some wins on the books. But then the RevOps person comes in and has to start evaluating like user adoption and value to business capabilities. And all of a sudden, you're shelving a bunch of software rather than canceling a subscription because the other company is using your software and you don't want to lose them as a client. So I'm sure
Yeah.
every RevOps leader listening is rolling their eyes and has been through this numerous times. But those are the kinds of examples of, you can have a really tiny problem like data quality that all of a sudden is massive problem because it's just the scale is enormous to tackle. And then on the other side, in a small business, you're making decisions off the cuff, like what software am I going to invest in? And I may need to have this contract for the next 3 to 5 years, and am I making the right decision now? So there's a huge amount of variables that go in, but the metrics are the same across the board, whether
Hmm.
you're in a big company or a small company. So that's kind of why I take comfort in that routine of measuring the data.
Yeah. On the big company side, I worked at one big company myself in my career and felt the pain of having to build those business cases and how long decisions take. Any
Yeah.
advice for RevOps folks in that position right now of how they can make their case, move things along? Does anything come to mind?
Well, personally, I'm a consensus builder. So my approach is always to connect with the partners that I support. So if I'm lucky enough to be in a RevOps role where I do have the ear of sales, marketing, customer success, it's easy to kind of take 30 minutes in a room, get a quorum, you'll solve most issues. I almost always try to refer to the data where possible. I bring the data to the team. Here's what this is telling me. Does this make sense to you? What do we do about it? Not always possible, especially if you're in one of those divisions. Like going back to my early days at Google, I was, running parts of marketing operations and I had to try and gain consensus with my peers in sales ops and my peers in customer success ops before I could even parlay that into, can I get a meeting with the next senior executive to be able to kind of build or get consensus from them. So it felt an awful lot like lobbying, like political lobbying. And it's difficult. You really have to have a passion for it. You have to have the courage of your conviction. So there's no short answer, there's no easy answer, but I like to just bring the data and try to have the data tell the story. And in that way, I think it can be backup for the person that I'm trying to convince, like, here's the proof, do with this what you will, and go from there.
I love that approach. It resonates with kind of my style as well. And then you also mentioned as one very specific example, but I know it's a lot of what you do as a consultant right now. Making a decision on the tech stack, is it still going to make sense 3 to 5 years from now?
Hmm.
That we probably have some listeners who are also going through this right now at early stage startups. Like, what's your advice for folks in that position? It could be as high level as you want or as specific as the stack that you like that you think is effective.
I have a really, really great tool that somebody at Uber gave me a few years ago, and it's a business capabilities tracker. And it's a master spreadsheet that lays out all of the business capabilities from beginning to end, product management, lead to op to close, tech stack, like everything you could think of that is a business capability. And you basically grade yourself across 5 different dimensions, like 4 different dimensions: people, process, data, and technology. But then you give yourself a grade, are we amazing at this? Are we like mature? Or are we nascent at this? And you
Hmm.
kind of go from there. So what happens is, as you fill out this business capabilities assessment tracker, you start to build up a heat map of where your biggest problems are, because it's color coded, right? So if you're really bad at something, it's red. If you're really good at something, it's green. And then you can easily surface to the leadership team where your most significant problems or challenges could be in the future. So I'll give you an example of this that will probably resonate. In a startup, when you buy a new piece of tech, the person that buys it is usually the admin or the power user. That's a risk, right? Immediately you've inherited a risk, because if that person turns around and leaves tomorrow, nobody's managing the tech, nobody's logged in as the admin, things fall apart, things break. So where the business capabilities assessment goes in and it says, okay, well, this particular piece of tech is for lead routing, as an example. Okay. So in lead routing, are we nascent? Are we just starting off with this? Do we have anything documented? Is there a succession plan? Is there, a maturity in this to where we've advanced our utilization of this capability? Are we improving
Hmm.
upon it? Can we measure it? And are we improving year over year? So if you do that, if you take the opportunity as a RevOps leader to do that for every single um, part of your business, even if you only focus on go to market at first and then you kind of move on, that can be super valuable for any RevOps leader to just have as a roadmap or a guide. I don't know what terminology is right here, but I kind of live and breathe on that doc. And it really helps me to surface the problems that are going to be most um, egregious in the future.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's so easy to firefight and lose the full view. And that sounds like a really good way to kind of get the full picture.
Yeah, a lot of people will tackle it another way, which is just have a big running doc of all the tech and the cost and the renewal dates coming up. And I've done that as well. That can be helpful too. But I think when you look at it from a business capabilities perspective, rather than just a budgetary line item, it becomes more effective to see where the risk is. Because, if you're going through, let's say, budgetary planning for next year, you want to save money, you want to reduce overhead, right? You want to, I guess, downsize or right size some of the contracts that you've maybe overinvested in the past. If you do it only from a budgetary or fiscal responsibility angle, you're missing out on a lot of the nuance that makes these things successful.
Hmm.
Nobody ever thinks about the re-education or the change management, the onboarding, the user adoption, like the cost of that in switching from one piece of tech to another is never factored in, or very rarely
Hmm.
factored in. So you can't make a decision like, oh, let's switch from this platform to this platform overnight because it's 10 grand cheaper, because you're not factoring in custom development work that might be needed, user adoption and enablement costs, ongoing education costs, and the lack of productivity, right? The productivity is going to go down during that change period. Are you sacrificing pipeline as well as switching
Yeah,
tech? So
might be the 10 grand difference right there.
it absolutely could be. So I go through this with my clients when they're trying to evaluate tech, And it's not when you're trying to buy new tech. It's really just when you're considering switching out something for something else. That's where you need to make the decision. And I'm not saying that budget isn't critical. I'm saying it's only one variable. And please consider the other variables. And when you're assessing your existing tech, have you even put in the effort that it takes to get that tech to be successful or to drive that business capability? You can't just turn on something like Gong or Outreach and expect it to work magically.
Yeah.
They're fantastic tools. They do amazing work, but they require effort and investment and enablement to be truly valuable. So if you, as an executive, think, oh, this isn't valuable because we bought it and it didn't work, you're missing the point, right? You're missing the fact that you only invested in the tech, but you didn't consider the total cost of ownership.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you. Switching gears slightly, because I know we're coming up on time in a little bit. You've had a more explicit focus in your career on marketing ops than some of our past guests. So with that kind of frame, I'm curious, what does it take, in your opinion, to be an excellent marketing ops leader?
Well, for any leader, really, being an effective partner is the most critical thing. And you mentioned this earlier, and I completely concur. Like, ops can often be seen as a support function, order taker. I would say, think of the marketing manager 10 years ago trying to evaluate the success of a bunch of events in order to plan for next year's spend. If a RevOps leader is doing their job properly, there's consistency in how the data is measured and analyzed that brings more accuracy and clarity to this process. So to me, bringing insights from reliable data is how to be an excellent leader and business partner in any function, particularly within marketing ops.
What do you think is the biggest pitfall as it relates to reliable data?
Oh, not having your own budget. If you are a leader, like a go-to-market ops, RevOps, marketing ops, don't just expect the large marketing programs budget to dig you out if a problem comes up. You have to plan for running your team as if it's your own P&L. Like, you need OpEx to run your team, for tech, for development, for contractors. I have run into this several times in my career where you have to go and ask for budget because something has come up, some issue. But if you really truly are being considered a strategic value to the team, you will be able to have your own, I wouldn't say discretionary budget, but budget that allows you to plan for your year, including being forward thinking and addressing problems before they become problems. That's really where I think the difference is. So that's a pitfall. If companies are saying, oh, I'm going to invest in RevOps, I'm going to put in a RevOps person, that's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. Even like double clicking on data even further, I guess, like, what do you think folks should be prepared for? Like, where can like marketing data go wrong? Is this like a bad configuration of the marketing automation platform? Is this like a data warehouse need? Like, help me understand that piece.
So if there was just one thing to nail down for marketing ops, it's
Easy.
analytics, right?
Yeah.
So the main thing you need to be able to focus on, or you should focus on, is being able to measure the effectiveness of dollars in, dollars out. If that's the only thing you do in marketing ops, it should be that. So how I typically like to tackle it, to be tactical for a second, is I partner with finance. I get a full list of all expenses billed against the marketing department. Then I start with something really easy, like categorizing all of that spend into channels. Then I can start to create campaigns that map to those channels for all future spend. It does require a decent amount of change management to deploy tracking like this, especially with product marketing managers that have been around a while and are used to doing things their own way. Building in some of that structure into their work, it takes a little bit of upfront investment, but if you tie every campaign to a PO number, suddenly your data starts to make much more sense. You're starting to close that gap between what we did and what the outcome was. And that's really where I thrive, is being able to tell a marketer, you spent this amount of money, these were your results, you had an X engagement rate, a Y opportunity, number of opportunities created, X amount of revenue contributed to the business, and X amount of revenue influenced. I like to be able to tell them a couple of things that just make sense to them, that they know they're being measured on, and I'm able to tell them that this is the reliable data that will serve you best. So it really does, like I said, require a decent amount of change management, but it focuses the marketer on the revenue goals rather than just executing the task. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I imagine that's how you build trust with them too, and they come to
It's
appreciate you and
100%
give them
built
that
trust.
visibility. It's great.
And that's how
Uh,
you become that effective leader, across the board.
yeah. Bridging the gap from marketing ops to RevOps, there's like
Yeah.
the age-old problem of sales and marketing misalignment. So I'm curious, like, what does it mean to you to have sales and marketing be aligned? And what are your kind of top one or two tips to, ensure that?
So what does it mean to have sales and marketing aligned? I think it means like it's a tacit understanding of how much pipeline and revenue each team are responsible for driving. Like most of the companies I work with are very similar business models, but one of the companies I work with is almost entirely outbound driven, AE hunter profile, very little marketing coverage for programs and demand gen. And another company I work with is almost completely the reverse. The majority of deals are coming in are driven by marketing dollars. That's not to say either way is better than the other. These are different industries with different market dynamics, but the success metrics are still the same. And the questions that I'm asking are still the same. How much money did we spend and how much value did we derive? And if we can answer those questions and we can monitor it consistently, we can stay aligned. So you can boil it down to dollars per head if you wanted to. Like how much pipeline did we create this week, whether it came from marketing or came from an AE, how much value did we create in this week? And then you start to look at the other variables like close rates and all of that fun stuff. But if you're starting by asking the right questions, you can keep sales and marketing aligned because fundamentally, if there is a gap, the gap is not ever going to be fulfilled by just one department. It's not like, oh, the only problem we're having is that we don't have enough content. The problem would maybe be we were missing good content and we need to enable our sellers to deploy that content effectively in their deal cycles. So it becomes a shared problem and a shared solution. And that might be oversimplifying, but that's how I like to think about it.
You make it sound so easy.
I know.
Love it. We're just about out of time here, Linda. This has been
Yeah.
great. We like to finish with just a quick rapid fire finish. First thing that comes to mind, kind of quick response. So I'll cover a few here.
Sure.
First, what's the biggest myth about RevOps in your opinion?
Don't just hire a RevOps leader unless you plan to give them a remit to build out a 3 to 5 year roadmap. So it's
Great.
not just like hiring a RevOps leader and suddenly you have RevOps. Really understand what it's going to take.
100%. What's your biggest pet peeve of sales reps?
Not putting stuff in Salesforce properly.
I think that's number one, probably.
Yeah. My colleague Emma uses a phrase that I love, skill versus will. And I always find it so hard to know in larger orgs where something might be falling off. And it always boils down to that. I would really love to be able to solve for that. Is it will or skill?
And then last one here. How would you describe a great RevOps leader in 3 words?
That is a really tough question. I've been able to answer all of your questions so far, and I'm really stuck on that one.
The best for
Great
last.
RevOps leader. Pragmatic, analytical, and passionate. That's more like character description than truly like a RevOps leader. But yeah, I think you have to have the passion, you care about the growth of the company, you care about all of the parts of the company and how they're developing and how they're improving. You're interested and invested in the health of the company, but you also need to be pragmatic and know when the right timing is for certain things. And yeah, if you're not analytical, you might as well go home.
I think we should leave it there. That caps it off perfectly. Linda, thanks so much for the time. I know this was really interesting. Anyone listening, if you have any questions for Linda, feel free to shoot them to me and I will track them down with her on your behalf. And thanks for tuning in. And Linda, thanks again. It was great.
Thanks, James. Talk soon. Bye.
Cheers.